Yep. Okay. So yeah, welcome to today's important call with as many CAPS members available as possible. Today is the 9th of September. So yeah, this code is all about starting and implementing the CAPS in the review process of SIP improvement, SIP process. So yeah, just want to sort of give a bit of game plan to today's meeting because we only got an hour. So so maybe to keep it efficient, so we'll reserve sort of majority of the call for CAPS questions and any inquiries any CAP members have, and then we'll open the floor later on to any community questions. I know Mike from Clarity Lab got questions about the voting criteria, so we'll leave that till the sort of towards the end, and any other audience's questions about this process at the very end. So let's get into it. So just a quick shout out to our beloved Queen. So rest in peace. Thank you for your service. And just to give people a bit of a quick overview of what this code is about to the CAPS or the audiences who turned up today. So this code is all about giving you guys the update and publicly and transparently, sort of being accountable to the community, sharing the updates. And it's also a great chance for people to, if they got a SIP idea they have, which I know, for example, Safe Transfer is one here, is a place where you can get feedback from other members, such as Jude or other technical guys. And just advocating for your ideas. And here, so that's mainly the opportunity you can get here. So maybe I'll give a very quick update as I do every week. SIP. So what is this, even a SIP? So for example, like NFT standard is a SIP, and just is a document that lives on GitHub that basically lays out the spec of the improvement and the changes. Last year we had Stacks 2.05, and that was a big SIP. So this year we'll have Stacks 2.1, but that's actually just a SIP, SIP 15, basically. And that's the sort of the review process. So it goes from like early ideas to recommend asking people to comment, and we'll get to later on stages such as SIP 13. So I'll just give everybody a bit of update. So SIP 13, believe is just waiting for the CAP or steering committee's review. And I believe like Aaron's commented on a few things. So just waiting for perhaps the Marvin and Mike to feedback any outstanding inquiries. So if that can be reviewed by the CAPS, we have 8 people, that would be great. So SIP 18, activation in progress a little bit later on. SIP 19, in fact, next week, we're going to have Raphael on to talk about his SIP and to explain to the community what it is even about. So SIP 16, that's been ratified last week. So that's a Fridger and Dan's SIP about metadata. So so that's a quick overview. And things are in draft stage, such as Safe Transfer and Fridger's authentication, profiling stuff, credential. So that's also a good one to sort of chime in. Any other GitHub issue outstanding? So I think there's one recent one that was just about inputting the steering committee's names, and all the videos are linked, so everybody can watch back to everything, and all the meeting notes are on GitHub. So if you want to chime in these earlier conversations, which are all SIP related, so things like BNS, things like Bitcoin derivation path. So all these things are available to comment, and even like things like Ryan's ideas, like these are all things like the caps or SIP editors. Everybody can chime into this kind of stuff. Is how we engage and sort of offer our professional opinions on those stuff. So just a bit of quick thing that we talk about a lot of different things here, but mainly SIP related. So stacks mining is a way to decentralize the mining. So because that will touch on certain changes that may require SIP. So we also talk about those stuff here. So Taproot, that's part of 2.1. So ecosystem DAO Mike is working on, which touches on voting process. So that's also part of the SIP. Yeah, so let's get into it then. So today, it's more about consideration advisory boards. So thanks everybody for coming. So we'd like to just offer, hopefully you guys read the blog. So if you got any question about the blog, about the role, here's a great opportunity to ask Jude or ask anybody. And if anybody got inquiries about anything they're unsure of, yeah, here's a great chance. So yeah, so does anybody have questions about the roles? I'll open up. Yeah, anybody can just unmute and comment.
I have a question about this announcement, and then also the selection of chairperson for cabs. So does each cab need to choose a chairperson before this announcement? And then what are the responsibilities of the chairperson? And also, how should this person be selected?
Okay, I can take a crack at those. Should the chairperson be chosen before the announcement? Probably a good idea, just because that kind of gets into the second thing. Chairperson's responsibility is mainly to be a point person. So the steering committee, if they need to get in touch with the cab, would do it through the chairperson if they could not reach members directly. That said, cabs kind of have a lot of autonomy into how they organize themselves, including how they choose their chairperson. It can be through any means that you can imagine. It could be like a vote, a coin toss, a dance off, whatever you feel is appropriate for what the cab is.
Yeah, and I was thinking like once you guys, volunteer or chosen your chairperson, that person would be the person to announce the establishment of the cab to the greater Stacks community. Yeah, so everybody is aware we got these panels of experts inserting into this process now. Yeah, so I didn't think maybe I would be the one or Jude would be the one. I think maybe the chairperson would be the one to announce who is in the panel, what their backgrounds are. So that's why I asked if each one of you could establish a little bit of bio, because like already this group is very big and we don't know who each others are sometimes, some of them. So it's just to offer like the whole Stacks community like a bit of insight into who are these experts looking after our SIPs on behalf, or at least advice to the steering committee or the whole greater Stacks community. That's how I think about it.
Does it answer your questions, Aaron?
Maybe. So I guess for things like the technical cab, like just looking at this like flow chart, right? The technical cab moves something from accepted to recommended, I assume that the chairperson is essentially in charge of deciding when something moves from accepted to recommended, whether or not that's like consensus amongst the members. And then the steering committee votes for activation. But like looking at the history of technical SIPs, that doesn't seem to be the activation criteria for any of them. So like effectively on the technical cab, like the chairperson is deciding what is moving from recommended to activating, right?
Not quite. So so per SIP 0, the steering committee's responsibility here is to look at the set of recommended SIPs, and in the event that a SIP has multiple cabs, all of them have to vote for recommendation. The steering committee chooses among the recommended SIPs which ones can proceed to activation in progress. Right now, you're absolutely right. Like every SIP that has moved to recommended status has moved subsequently to activation in progress. There hasn't been any that's been stuck in limbo or withdrawn or rejected or anything like that, just because the volume is low enough. That's not really a problem. And also there's been no conflicts between SIPs, so it's not like one would have to preclude the other from existing concurrently. Right now also, the system kind of operates in a bit on a shoestring personnel budget, in that, I've been on the technical cab as well as the steering committee and have kind of worn both hats. And also the technical cab up until very recently was just me. So that's partly why it's been moving the clip that it has. Going forward, what I hope would happen is the technical cab, without loss of generality here, the technical cab would come up with its own way of deciding what it means, how that body chooses to move a SIP to recommended. Maybe it's a majority vote, let's say, or a 2/3 vote, or maybe the chairperson has unilateral say. As long as that's written down somewhere and the cab members are happy with it, then that would be how a SIP moves from accepted to recommended status through that particular cab. That said, like there are, because of the way that cabs come into being, like if it's the case that the cab is operating in like a dysfunctional way, let's say, like, maybe half the members or almost half the members don't like what the cab is deciding to recommend, they can form their own cab and they can submit a SIP saying, hey, we want to be a new cab, please instantiate us. And then it's the steering committee's job to do that. At that point, future SIP authors can ask that new cab to consider their SIPs instead of the old cab, thereby bypassing any sort of dysfunction that might arise from inactivity or from conflict within the cab. But so that's the kind of, I hope, explains the discrepancy between like what SIP 0 says ought to happen and what has been happening. It's just mainly because up until like this week, we hadn't really had enough people operating the SIP process.
So I think that like, I don't know about, I guess, the other cabs, but from my perspective, the technical cab would almost certainly need more than like the next 2 or 3 days to work out like who the first chairperson is going to be, what the process for selecting chair people should be, see like what the responsibilities of each member should be, and other things like that. So just like thinking about like announcing all of this next week, it just seems like a lot to me.
Well, that's totally fine. We had a similar dilemma when we were setting this up at Stacks 2.0. What you can do is select a provisional chairperson. Like they hold the job for the next year, let's say, until you can figure out specifically what the cab's bylaws will be.
Yeah, I think even that's a pretty big ask.
I mean, you can just draw lots, like throw the dice, and whoever gets the lowest is the chairperson. All they have to do is just be the point of contact.
Yeah. Right, but they're like the point of contact and probably the person responsible for like making sure SIPs that get submitted get reviewed.
Correct. If you'd like, I can take that last responsibility. I already kind of do. Like, as long as
Right. I
know
mean,
who
you've
to-
been effectively acting as the technical chairperson.
Well, yes, but at the same time, the steering committee can, reach out to the cabs and say, hey, we have a new SIP. Can you please give it a review in a reasonable amount of time? Like, just knowing who to contact is the big ask, I think, in the instantiation of a cab. And that's why the instantiation rules for a cab specify there has to be a chairperson. So the steering committee can know who to start badgering in case they have to go do something. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah, I think so.
I was probably like think about it. Well, personally, anyway, my interpretation is more like a little bit more like coordinating sort of the members, but actually maybe the chairperson doesn't have any more voting power or anything. Just maybe more of a getting the herd to do something.
That's true. I think the biggest difficulty that cabs will face in the near future is just making sure that things get done.
Yeah.
Like, inactivity is our biggest enemy here.
Yeah, for example, maybe like SIP 13 needs commenting or reviewing, and if is that right? Is it right? Like, if it's been there for like ages and nobody's looked at it, but that needs sort of reviewing, maybe the chairperson would be the one who would get the members and say, yeah, guys, we need to go and check this out.
Is there like a threshold of cab members that need to review? Is it that all of them need to review and give input, or is it some specific number? I'm just thinking about, in terms of this process, it feels like that chairperson would do a lot of project management, which I feel like they are here for sort of their technical expertise. And so, yeah, is there a specific threshold and maybe a way that we could streamline it and make it easier for folks and sort of send reminders and say, okay, 3 out of 5 folks have been able to review. Our default is to sort of move forward and try and operationalize that a bit more as compared to leaning on one person. So yeah, sorry, I'm a little bit new to this, but is there a threshold of people that sort of need to give their review in order for it to proceed?
It's not specified in SIP 0 what that really, so SIP 0 doesn't specify very much anything at all about the internal operation of cabs, because the thinking is that each cab will like come up with its own way of doing things. But I do agree though, like, if it would unblock people, like the steering committee could like publish a SIP that provides some guidelines, or even just provides us the guidelines without even going through the SIP process. Like, hey, here's like a template that you can build off of, where that would be, adequate for fulfilling your cab duties. And that could just be like a majority of members have to sign off with an accept in order for the thing to go forward. And if you want to like iterate on that and have like a way to do, internal, so if you want to iterate on that through some sort of internal process where, maybe there could be a veto threshold, or there could be some way to unblock getting reviews done. That's something the cab could figure out on its own later. Would that be helpful, Aaron, for your purpose, just having like a set of default guidelines?
Yeah, I think it would definitely help with this process. So something like, just like a template for how a cab should run. Yeah, I think that would help a lot.
Yeah, I can throw something together and get that out there.
Yeah, I do think that it sort of speaks to, right. Like the fact that we should figure these things out, I think, probably before anybody commits to something, right? Like, if I'm going to serve as chairperson of the technical cab for like some stretch of time, like I would want to know that doesn't just mean that I'm like personally responsible for reviewing every technical cab that comes in and like shepherding it across the finish line indefinitely. Which, like, if we don't do something specifically otherwise, like could be the case. So yeah, I think formalizing this process would probably be a good step.
Okay. I'm happy to take that responsibility on. I can give you a guideline, and I can also start annoying people on emails or Discord or however else they're available in case that there's been some delay in getting a SIP taken a look at.
Yeah, I think my one recommendation would be that for cabs, chairperson should be rotational by lots.
Sure, we can all take turns doing it. I mean, the chairperson doesn't have that much power in the according to SIP 0. It's really just like you're the person that gets yelled at when things aren't happening.
Yeah, but who wants to get yelled at all the time?
Well, I say that facetiously. Like no one's actually going to be yelled at. It's just that there has to be someone that the external entities outside of the cab can reach out to in case they have a question or need feedback or follow up for.
Yeah, I get it.
But yeah, like if a blocker to this is feeling like being a chairperson is also, taking on unwanted PM responsibilities, like this is a small enough operation that it's probably fine for the time being for the steering committee to just take that responsibility, just reaching out to individual cab members saying, hey, like we have a SIP and accepted state that needs, this many more reviewers. Can you take a look next week or something like that? That's fine.
And you can use me to facilitate that as well.
Also fine. That's great, Hero. That was my next question. Who can I offload this to?
But yeah, I think rotational, I think even from a sense of like decentralization will make sense anyways. So maybe every few months or every quarter, I don't know. I think by actually doing it, we'll figure out a lot of these details. I think even if we plan like what we think is the best way right now, I'm sure along the way we'll figure out like, oh, doesn't actually work that way in practice. So yeah, maybe by having a quick guideline and actually just by doing it hands-on, we'll figure out all the details. Then we can revise the guideline for everybody. So little bit of guinea pigs right here, you guys.
That's partly why the SIP process is not well specified for the cab operation. We don't yet know what an effective cab strategy looks like, so we're hoping to discover that along the way, but we don't want to tie ourselves down into a bad procedure.
Yeah.
And all helps iterate on this. Like there's actionable items coming out of it.
I have a question.
Yep.
I'm sorry if this has been covered already, but can you just give me like a high level of what the steering committee does? And then additionally, we have all these new kind of cab members for the various kind of departments, so to say. Are we going to be adding people to the steering committee as well?
Right. So right now the steering committee is myself and Gina.
Okay, cool.
So the steering committee can grow. I believe the initial body has 3 people, and I believe the third one is supposed to be community chosen, but we're still blocked on the governance working group coming up with a effective way of doing that. But the door is certainly open, and it will remain open as long as it needs to remain open for that to happen. I think it's very important to have a community chosen member on the steering committee. But that said, the body itself can grow arbitrarily large. It should be as big or as small as it needs to be. And that's easily addressed through either the SIP process or through a SIP that in turns further specifies the procedure by which it can be grown or shrunk. Insofar as what the steering committee's powers are, they're actually somewhat limited. The steering committee is more of a steward than an activist in the procedure. Their main responsibilities are to recognize the existence of new cabs. So if there's currently suppose down the road someone wants to make an NFT specific cab, like if NFTs get so popular we need to have NFT experts review SIPs for them, then one of the steering committee's responsibilities would be to help a hypothetical NFT working group turn itself into a cab so that future SIPs can get reviewed against that cab. Other responsibility that the steering committee has is to look at the set of SIPs that have been recommended by cabs and prioritize ones prioritize ones for activation. That right there is more of a, that right there is less of a, that right there is so far has just been like, you know, doing the necessary rubber stamping basically of moving unrecommended SIPs into activation in progress SIPs, because the only time in which one SIP might be accepted over another at the exclusion of that other one is if the SIPs were somehow in conflict. Let's say, for example, down the road, there might be two different SIPs that offer two different changes to the token minting schedule. Like obviously at most one of them can become active. So at that point, the steering committee would have to step in and pick one. That said though, like should that situation ever arise, and given that we're dealing with a software artifact where anything is possible, it's unlikely that could ever arise. But should that situation ever arise, what would likely happen is the steering committee would try to execute some sort of community-wide poll to figure out which one has more support and has a better chance of activating. But should that situation arise, it would likely be a domain-specific means by which that conflict would be resolved, considering that different SIPs, you know, might have different activation criteria or have different stakeholders. So we would have to figure it out when that happens. The steering committee can't, for example, hire or fire people from the SIP process. That can't deny people access or stop people from submitting SIPs. All it really does is just all the steering committee is really doing here is just trying to facilitate SIPs through the process. Like we can't say no to a SIP if it could have a chance of activating, for example. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Like one of the, I think, real test of the mettle of the steering committee here is like, what if there's a SIP that the steering committee members personally do not like? Would the SIP still get through? I think the answer to that is yes. And it should get through because the role of the steering committee is to implement the community's will, not to implement their own will.
Okay, cool. I just also wanted to reiterate kind of support for what Aaron is pointing towards, which I feel like ambiguity around responsibilities or like lack of, you know, I don't know if it's steering committee or maybe there should be another kind of group of people that act as kind of PMs, but I do feel like if, you know, if technical cabs are here for like technical stuff, but then they're also forced to do all this PMing stuff, I feel like people just won't want to do that, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. And that's something that I'm sure we can figure out. Like,
yeah, definitely. I agree.
Yeah, the steering committee could take that on for now. Perhaps the steering committee could create a separate body for this, like you just recommended.
I've got questions myself.
Sure.
What if we have 5 caps right now?
Mhm.
What if we have 3 caps against and 2 for, or 2 against 3 for? So it's not like a consistent all 5 caps for. I would imagine these kind of situation might not happen very often. But what happens if it comes up? What would the steering committee decide?
Well, if you have a SIP that is recommended by some cabs and not others, and if you have a SIP that has, let's say, 3 different cabs on it, or 4 or 5, that's honestly a sign that your SIP might be too broad, and it might be easier to get your SIP to get your SIPs ratified if they were broken down into smaller individual SIPs that maybe only needed the sign off of 1 or 2 cabs. That said, though, that's a good question. Like, what is the role of the steering committee, or the role of anyone really, should that type of conflict arise? If you have a SIP that, let's say, has 2 considerations to it, and one cab says no and the other one says yes, I would think that means that your SIP cannot move forward. You need to take your SIP and break it down into 2 SIPs, one for one cab, one for the other one, and you should figure out why the other one is saying no. It's really the job of the SIP author to make sure that the criteria that the cabs put forward in their rejection are met on the second round of review. So a cab can say, if it's the case that, like, so let me back up for a sec here. There is a general assumption in this entire process that cab members are acting in good faith, and I don't think that assumption can ever be removed just because, you know, if we can't act in good faith, then nothing's ever going to happen. So if it's the case that, like, you know, there's a good faith review from the cabs that say no to a particular SIP, then that doesn't mean that they're saying no due to personal reasons against the author. It means that they're saying no, there's some specific, you know, dispassionate reason why there's something wrong with this SIP. And that could be something that gets addressed out of band, but the SIP author should work with that cab to try to make the SIP into something good, or they should come to the realization that maybe that what they're trying to do is not possible. Or perhaps there's such a strong faction in the community that really wants the SIP that maybe a different cab could be created that in effect bypasses the existing cab. Like that type of situation, I think would be so extreme though, that like we might even have, I don't know, if we can't get something through the SIP process and we have no real way of addressing any sort of problems or conflicts, that's probably indicative of a deeper fissure going on. Something kind of like the Bitcoin block size wars, where it's not even clear that the SIP process would even be the right tool for addressing the problem. It might be the best thing to do is to split the chain.
So I have some questions about the ethics cab that I think flow quite nicely from that last tail end of the discussion. I guess first off, I'm curious if you could just speak for a minute about what you see the role of the ethics cab as being. I am a bit skeptical about the need for it, just to be perfectly candid. And I think that with something like an ethics board, it can be a little bit dangerous almost in that you're specifically saying, hey, here's a group of people who are thinking about ethics, and it almost impliedly abdicates the other people from thinking about ethics. And, you know, from my experience and to what you just said, there's an implicit assumption that everybody here is, or I guess explicit at this point, that everybody is acting in good faith. In my experience with everybody that I know on the call, everybody's highly principled and thoughtful. Like, what additional role does the ethics cab play above and beyond the other cabs that doesn't, you know, at the end of the day, just turn into a cost benefit analysis about the community, like what's best for the community? Because that's not really ethics.
Sure. So I'm so I guess like the first bit of information that might help clarify this is that the SIP process is more than just the blockchain. It covers like any of the ways and means by which the Stacks community conducts itself. For example, I know there's a code of conduct being worked on right now, and that would have to pass through the ethics cab to be ratified if it were executed as a SIP. But that's not code, obviously. That's like a ecosystem-wide standard that we would agree to hold ourselves to. That said, though, like if you're worried about the ethics cab being sidelined, the SIP 000 describes currently allows a SIP author to pick the cabs that they want to review it. So if someone unscrupulous, for example, wanted to make a SIP that, I don't know, did something bad or nefarious, or at least it was felt as bad and nefarious by the community, they obviously wouldn't ask the ethics community to review it, but the steering committee could turn around and say, hey, this clearly has an ethical dimension to it. We would really like you to have this submitted to the ethics community, the ethics cab.
Just real quick, dude, I just want to make sure that I'm clear about my point. It's actually the opposite, that I'm concerned that the existence of the ethics cab somehow abdicates the other cabs from simply looking at everything with an ethical standpoint. Like I'm skeptical that it's actually wise to appoint a specific group to be thinking about ethics. Like, why should that just not be spread equally among all the other cabs?
Oh, I think
not have the ethics cab.
Yeah, so why have the ethics cab in particular? I mean, if you feel
exactly.
I see. So I'm of two minds of this for the same reason I think you just point out. Like, obviously, like people shouldn't abdicate morals and ethics. Just because you sit on a different cab from the ethics cab does not mean that you cannot be ethical or should not think about ethics. At the same time, though, like some things really are gray. Like, suppose that somebody invents Tornado Cash for Stacks and runs it on Stacks, and it's discovered later on that, I don't know, North Korea is using it to launder money. That I think actually is a very difficult ethical question to answer as to vis-a-vis like what should happen on the blockchain. Should the Stacks miners stop mining transactions that talk to it? Should someone propose a version 2 of this contract that implements ZK KYC so that it can be used legitimately and would not be used by nefarious actors? Like how to resolve the existence of something like Tornado Cash on the Stacks blockchain, I think would actually require some deep ethical thought above and beyond what your typical person might think of.
But doesn't that at the end of the day essentially boil down to a cost benefit analysis about what's best for stacks in general? Like again, it doesn't particularly feel like ethics, or if it is, like what are the principles that we're being guided by, and why can't that just be codified?
I mean, like, I guess you could ask the same question about laws in general. Like, why don't laws specify every contingency of everything? Well, the answer is they can't. Like, no one knows the future. People find ways around them. And that's why we have like a judicial process to figure out like what really is the right thing to do here in a way that's not a cost benefit analysis, but is in fact consistent with like a higher order constitution or set of human rights. In that capacity, like I do think that one of a few things might happen here. Like, it could be the case that the ethics cab gets involved in a lot of these SIPs that have these higher order impacts on the ecosystem, just naturally because there is a non-trivial ethical dimension to a particular SIP. For example, a SIP that does something just like specifying a trait interface for like SIP 9 or SIP 10 might not need the ethics, might not have any ethical considerations at all because it's not, you know, significantly impacting people's human rights. But another technical SIP that does have potential impact, like the existence of ZK, token transfer system like Tornado Cash, would have an ethical component to it and would need some sort of ethical feedback.
So who are the stakeholders that you're essentially representing, that you're trying to represent their interests? Because you're mentioning human rights, which has many dimensions and many stakeholders.
Well, sure. So I'm not a lawyer. I am not well versed in the, you know, the philosophy of ethics beyond just, you know, the lived experience that I have. I think it's important to have people who do understand these things deeply so that we can come to some sort of resolution should there be, you know, community disagreement on other aspects of the design of the system. And that's something I hope the ethics cab would figure out for us.
Can I interrupt for 1 second and just ask a question? So in the example you used, Jude, Tornado Cash comes and North Korea is using it to launder. You're expecting the ethics cab to be able to direct miners and network participants in terms of what they can and can't use, like in terms of how they're using the network or the open source. Like, sorry, I'm a bit confused.
Sure. So here's an example of how this might. I'm not. By the way, talking prescriptively here. I'm just using an example. Suppose
I think it's a good example.
What's up?
I think it's a good example.
Sure. Suppose Tornado Cash lands on Stacks blockchain and it gets used this way. And then suppose the US government decides to sanction the Stacks blockchain. Like, that's kind of a problem. That inhibits its use case. That inhibits its usability. It puts users in legal jeopardy because maybe they touched funds that passed through the Tornado Cash equivalent. One way to rectify this could be to publish a technical SIP that executes a soft fork that prevents transactions from ever hitting Tornado Cash ever. Is that okay? Because there are legitimate users of Tornado Cash as well. Like, is it okay if they had their funds?
Got it. So the gap that you're seeing that the ethics cab is supposed to fill in that scenario is for the solution that would potentially, like, it is, the ethics cab is basically giving a delineation on whether or not the solution to this, it provides an ethical solution for the network and the chain and for the path forward.
Yeah, and that's above and beyond a cost benefit analysis here, because like if you just applied cost benefit analysis, you find yourselves in kind of this very dark place pretty quickly, where it's like, oh, well, some people are more equal than others, or, you know, this only hurts so many people, so therefore we should hurt the few to help the many, or something like that. And I don't think that's okay in 100% of all situations. Part of the ethics cab's job in this case, I think, would be to figure out exactly what the impact on the human aspect of the Stacks community would be by executing certain technical decisions.
Yeah, look, I won't belabor this more. I gotta say, I agree with Sam. This sounds like very utopian, and it sounds like something that, yeah, anyway. I need to think about my thoughts a little more and maybe write them down. But yeah, I have deep concerns about the existence of this. I'll follow up. Thank you.
Well, maybe we should game it out the other way. Like, what if the ethics cab didn't exist?
Then the scenario you just described would make a lot more sense in terms of how the solution would be gotten to. Like, everyone should, like, part of coming up with the technical solution should be ethics versus us coming up with the technical solution and then some sort of sanctified ethics cab coming down on the technical solution saying, well, no, in our opinion, it's, you know, do you see what I mean? Like, that this entire thing seems kind of counter to me to the way an open source decentralized network like this is supposed to work, where like this should be kind of innate to everyone and everything. But yeah, again, I need to, it's late here. I need to think a little bit more about this and write up my thoughts a bit more coherently.
I do just have one comment. I don't know which side I'm on as far as, like, you know, if it makes sense to have or not, but I originally kind of thought of the ethics cab in the same way that I think of the technical cab, which is, you know, people on the technical cab have certain expertise in certain technical contexts. And it's the same with people on the ethics cab, where like there are people who have spent a lot more time learning and thinking more deeply about ethics, and then that they could provide that context when necessary. That's kind of the extent to which I was considering it. And to me, that makes sense. I don't think there should be like a holy ethics cab that's like, do this and don't do that, you know? But I don't think anyone's suggesting that either.
Yeah, I think the way I thought about it was also they can offer their, you know, their sort of view, but that view can be taken or not taken. It's not like it's a yes or no kind of thing.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't think the ethics cab doesn't have like veto power over SIPs because they're not purview to, right? So if you submit a SIP that is not under the ethics consideration, then the ethics cab has no say on it, period. Like SIP 9 and SIP 10 didn't.
Yeah. Well, that certainly can't be the case, because like the ethics cab, if it exists, if we're to say that there's a purpose for it, it has to be able to, I mean, it certainly can't have veto power, but it has to be able to jump in and give its say and be one of the assigned cabs to review something, even if everybody else doesn't think it's ethical, if it's under the ethics cab purview.
Sure. I'm not sure this has been clearly said anywhere, but like a SIP can receive feedback from anyone, right? It doesn't have to, it's not limited to just the cab members. So if someone felt strongly about something that was under review from cabs, they are more than welcome to make public feedback about it. And in doing so, they could potentially build community support to require the addition of the ethics cab to look at something.
Hey, I just threw this as a comment in the chat, but I'm wondering if it would be helpful for the ethics cab to kind of lay out a set of principles that, you know, that they think that Stacks community should strive for, and then basically when they get tagged to review a SIP, essentially kind of weigh the effects of that SIP kind of against those principles, and whether there's kind of a conflict between those principles, and then just give their feedback on that. Because that to me then doesn't really seem like a problem. It's just having kind of an analysis, again, because there's like no veto right here, just really just having kind of an analysis as to whether you know, a certain SIP would either further or potentially kind of undermine certain agreed to principles that we are, principles that we have as a community have.
I think that would be helpful. I think that's kind of in the same vein as the ethics cab's involvement in the creation of a code of conduct.
Yeah, maybe if it's okay to move on from that.
If the ethics cab also wants to think that it's unethical for itself to exist, that's fine too. Just looking at the comments here.
Yeah,
That remains my position at this time. Yeah.
yeah. I've been told Sam, he's very a principled guy, so that's why I asked him to join, because yeah, he'll raise anything, which is great. That's what this party is about. Yeah, maybe we'll move on that, and then maybe if there's any further concern, we can take that on afterwards. Yeah. So just sort of to be clear of what we would love to see. I don't know if it's I or just other people do, but yeah, so would be great to sort of get everybody's name on GitHub and get a bit of bio from everybody, and I'll help everybody put that in, and also like to move on from the current state of just having names is to establish some of like Orlando said, establish some of those parameters or scopes, whether it's part of the CAP's purview or not. So yeah, would be great if people get a chance this week to hash some of these things out, and maybe we'll announce. Oh, I don't know if it's too much for this week, but the other sort of little ask is, in addition to figuring those things out, at least my thought was to sort of announce or to sort of do a sort of preliminary review of the Stacks 2.1 to just give people Stacks community a sort of heads up understanding of whether the CAPs, after CAPs review, they think is a good or bad idea, or at least just to offer the information out there so people can be more informed, the community members. I don't know what people think about that.
Where to begin? Let's see. There's just so many things happening in 2.1.
Yeah, I was thinking like to just use the early blogs that were written by Stackco, and some other information. And I did make a thread about everything.
Yeah, like, didn't you have one of these informative threads here?
Yeah, I put everybody's link in there, whether it's from Ken from Experts or I think this guy called Codex. I'm actually inviting him to early October to give his view on the Stacks 2.1. But yeah, maybe using the available resource right now, or if people want to give a quick, if people are more technical, they can feel free to go on this GitHub place where the Stacks 2.1 being project managed. There's more technical stuff, but I thought to give just early commentary about Stacks 2.1, and that sort of serves the announcement as they sort of establishing the CAP to the community of who's on and heads up education for 2.1 or commentary. Okay.
Sorry, I'm just a little confused. What's the ask?
So apart from getting the names on GitHub, so is to publish just an early commentary, if you like, about Stacks 2.1, which is SIP 15.
Okay, and each cab doing that?
Yes.
We're a little, it might be a little too early to do that because SIP 15 is not even close to done.
Yeah.
There's like the text written up. There's just code at this point and maybe a few notes about some parts of the code and what it does. You want to wait until that's ready for a full read through?
I mean,
unless there's like, you know, anything that's really sticking out to people right now.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like if there's anything that just like to catch anything earlier on, I guess. But but I'm not saying it has to be like that. I'm just making a bit of suggestion whether this could be a way to, as part of the announcing its establishment of the CAPs, to offer a little bit of commentary based on the resources we've got.
I think it's a good idea to sort of get insights early, but also just being wary of folks' time. It might be helpful to wait until there is something comprehensive to review and they can do sort of this one-time review unless there's anything sort of controversial to flag early. I kind of feel like in terms of announcing the cabs, it could be helpful to essentially have some of these resources, have some of these discussions fleshed out a little bit more in terms of how the cabs might potentially operate. You know, what's under the purview, condensing some of the takeaways from this call, because it feels like there's both a lot of information on GitHub that is sort of on the SIP 000, but then also a fair amount of open questions. And so if we were able to address some of those with the announcement, that could be helpful for just sharing the guidelines and trying to also bring more folks into the loop and to participate.
Yep. I mean, I'm happy with that. I don't know. Yeah. What do you think, Jude? Does that sound like a okay way forward?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay. Actually, just quickly, I know we're running out of time. Just want to make sure like people know who are on the other cabs. So maybe I think everybody knows like Zan, Matty, Chante, Bryce from Hero, Aaron, JW from Foundation. So we got quite a few community members, Dan, Thomas, Jamil, Teji, and Mike from Clarity Lab in Technical Cab, Shannon from Foundation, and Eli Herf, Brad, he works in Gamma, Nick from Gamma. On the ethics cab, we got Hodl Stacks, and he's part of the zero X DAO with Orlando. Sorry, Orlando is a stack of DAOs with zero BTC. Yeah, so Juliet come from legal background. She's been in stacks for a while. So yeah, just to sort of introduce everybody. Yeah, so just quickly, if there's opportunity for Mike to sort of raise his commentary about voting criteria.
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Hello?
Hello?
Sorry, Jude?
I was just asking if it's written up somewhere, just because we're at the top of the hour and I just want to make sure.
Oh, right.
Yes, it's on the forum actually.
Oh,
so
awesome.
it's basically a follow-up to the questions that were open from the last call. So I just wanted to follow up with you actually. But yeah, you could follow up on the forum. That would be even better, because it basically comes down to we can support the voting with stacking or with just stacks balance. Either could be supported, but the problem is that we can't capture votes from a desktop wallet, so we'd be excluding most of the people who are actually stacking, because we're connecting via the web wallet. So that was kind of the main issue I wanted to bring up actually here with you, Jude, following on from the conversation last week.
Right. The issue is that they're stacking through the web wallet. So they're stacking through Exodus, and Exodus has a pool they operate. Can't they just use the same address to spend from that?
Well, the DAO is connecting via the web wallet, so the voting's through the web wallet. It could be through Exodus as well, but the main issue is that they won't be voting from the address where they're stacking from. So they're excluded who are stacking with their desktop address. That's the main issue. So if like the desktop supported SIP18, for example, then we'd be okay. But we could probably take off chain votes as signed structured messages. But I don't think we'll be able to do that for 2.1. I think that's too short a time scale.
All right. Yeah, but it doesn't have to be the same address per se. It just has to be cryptographically linked to the tokens that you have locked up.
Yeah.
Right, but if that's, it could be the case, but yeah, like if that's too much of an ask between now and Stacks 2.1
Right.
voting, then we'll just find a different way to do it.
Okay, well, if you get time, have a look at the forum post and let me know what you
Will
think.
do.
Thanks.
Okay, so yeah, sorry we're that little bit over, but yeah, thanks everybody for coming. We'll catch up on Discord or other places.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, y'all. Yeah, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.